1,200 kilometers off the coast of Mexico lies a lost and little-known island, Clipperton, a tiny atoll whipped by winds and battered by Pacific breakers. Explorer Jean-Louis Etienne set sail to discover this unique ecosystem. He and his family, along with an international team of scientists, will live on the island for 4 months. Within a few days, a small village springs up on the ring of coral. The 40 scientists get down to exploring the unique biodiversity of this special island, the island at the end of the world. Clipperton is home to the Gecarcinus Planatus, a most puzzling creature. It is a land crab, yet here it is in the middle of the ocean on an almost deserted atoll. Apparently, this creature has no natural predators, as its bright color would make it easy to spot and very vulnerable. Jean-Marie Bouchard has a doctorate in biology and specializes in crustaceans, creatures covered by a hard carapace or shell. The scientists who study them are known as carcinologists. Clipperton is an exceptional site for carrying out this type of research.
Now I'm simply counting the crabs. I've marked out a perimeter and I'll look for all the animals within that area. I catch some of the animals right away because they're on the surface. Others are hidden in their burrows. And even if it seems like I'm destroying their hiding places, they will rebuild them tomorrow. You can easily tell the males from the females by the form of their abdomens. This one has a triangular abdomen, and so we're looking at a male. The biggest crabs here are males. Females, on the other hand, have rounded abdomens, which form part of the surface of the sternum.
Here in the shade of the palm trees, Jean-Marie has identified 170 crabs in an area of 100 square meters. He sometimes finds them at a depth of more than 30 centimeters underground. If there are that many crabs living on the rest of the 2 square kilometers of the island, then Clipperton may be inhabited by over several 100,000 crabs in all. On this coral reef, the Gecarcinus Planatus is the lord of the land, but biologists expect to find lots of other crustaceans living along the reef's submerged slopes. Crustaceans are to the sea what insects are on land. The number of different genuses, species, and families can make you dizzy. Decapods, stomatopods. Catching them on Clipperton requires the brushing and suction method. Scientists perform their search at sea level all the way down to a depth of 60 meters in a marine environment which is often hit by typhoons. The coral is broken by the swells. Life has a hard time taking firm hold. The expedition's team of carcinologists intends to compare the biodiversity of Clipperton with that of other islands in the eastern Pacific, which are not made of coral, such as the Galapagos, Cocos, or Malpelo Islands. In the field lab, the team establishes some initial conclusions. There are not that many different species, but each has many individual members. In all, the West Pacific Islands, when studied in previous years, yielded a total of 488 species of crustaceans. At Clipperton, the biologists have found just 61. The unique and native species of the island represent no more than 6% of this number. One of them is this hermit crab with orange legs. The team will deliver more than 1,000 jars of different samples to a lab for analysis. Many of the specimens will be added to the collections of the Natural History Museum in Paris and provide an accessible reference source for scientists around the world.
Tu sais, c'est en petit, ça se verra pas beaucoup que c'est flou.
Jean-Louis Etienne's wife Elsa has the job of making the scientists' work known to a wider audience. Based on the information they give her, she is writing a journal that will be used in primary schools and will feature a crab named Basil. In order to protect themselves during the hottest hours of the day, certain crabs dig a temporary shelter. It takes them over 15 minutes to shift around a kilo of sand. Understandably, it's really tempting just to squat in someone else's hole. At Clipperton, the crabs live in 12 different environments. By the cocoa palms, on the beach, a terrace formed by sediment. The carcinologist must study them all. The counting takes place between 10:30 in the morning and 5 in the evening, the time when most of the crabs are sheltering in their burrows, away from the heat. The Planatus is well adapted to the island and cohabits rather well with the 120,000 masked boobies and their sharp beaks. Jean-Marie marks 100 crabs whose behavior he will study day after day. The felt tib pen numbers will disappear when the crabs shed their skins, as they do once a year. 20 or so will be sent to the museum and placed in a replica of their natural environment, so that observations may be continued after the expedition comes to an end. Today it appears that the Planatus is in danger. Scientists on previous expeditions estimated there were more than 10 million of them. But after several weeks, Jean-Marie estimates their number is down to only 1 million, indicating a major decline. Jean-Louis Etienne discusses this problem during a teleconference.
There's an American biologist with us at the moment called Robert Pittman. He was telling us about the first time he came here around 20 years ago. According to him, there were huge numbers of crabs here then, whereas now he thinks we're less disturbed by them. Whenever we're sitting still, we always get crabs walking over our feet. But he says that 20 years ago in the evening, the ground was red. There were so many of them, and the soldiers who were here in 1966 described the same thing. So we have to conclude that the numbers of crabs are diminishing.
Why is the crab population declining?
There are not very many possible explanations. What we can say is that the rat population is growing, and we have seen from the rats' dens that they eat a lot of small crabs. So perhaps the rats are to blame for the declining numbers of crabs. We don't know.
The scientists Michel Pascal and Olivier Lorvelec have been given the task of getting rid of the rats.
Here we see our greedy little crab eater. There is no bird here capable of doing this, so perhaps he's the one who's been killing all the crabs.
These rodents arrived by accident and are disturbing the island's natural balance. Michel and Olivier, the rat killers, have a delicate task. The rats seem to have proliferated more than expected. A failed extermination is the worst. The few remaining rats are generally the most cunning. At the same time, their prey species, freed from the pressure of predators, proliferate in their turn, till they become a formidable store of food for future generations of rats. Of course, the well-fed rats then go on to multiply at an astonishing rate. They double their numbers compared to the initial colony and once more disturb the ecosystem they have colonized. The sudden explosion of the population could cause the disappearance of the species we want to protect.
La moyenne remonte 27.
It seems the rats were introduced to the islands in 1998. They arrived as stowaways on a boat that was tossed about by a storm and ran aground on one of the beaches. Ironically, the shipwreck now has been colonized by another crab species, the Grabsus grabsus. Man has been responsible for introducing rats to more than 80% of the islands around the world. Where we go, they follow. And so, like us, they have colonized almost the whole planet. And they are not the only ones. Many other animal and vegetable species follow wherever we go. These migrations are as damaging to the natural environment as the effects of global warming. But the sea has also made it possible for the crabs to get here. Their larvae traveled on bits of driftwood, like floating tree trunks swept off the mainland by violent storms, and then brought here by the ocean currents. The larvae have a life expectancy of 10 to 18 days. In that time, they could have drifted from the archipelagos of the eastern Pacific or from the coast of Mexico, where some of their near cousins live. Once on an island, the larvae develop. These subterranean galleries provide them with essential moisture. All species of crab, whether they live on land or on sea, have gills, and humidity is essential for them to function. In order to remain properly hydrated, the Planatus hides from the midday heat, but there is little shade alongside the lagoon, which is their only source of fresh water. Jean-Marie Bouchard installs sensors to measure the level of humidity. The atoll's coral ring acts like a huge sponge. By flattening their bellies against the ground, the crabs take best advantage of the cold and damp. Along with Jean Prant, who is responsible for logistics, rat killers Michel and Olivier pursue their extermination campaign. They load around 50 rat traps into the dinghy and head for the tiny islands in the middle of the closed lagoon. They want to know whether the rats have managed to reach these little patches of land.
It would be good if we could put traps there.
We'll go around in order to put them downwind.
Downwind, okay. We'll put down some traps.
The problem is that we might catch more hens in the traps. If there are nests of coots and moorhens, then there are probably no rats on the island.
So we'll reload all the stuff. We'll just put a trap down there.
I just want to get a look at the sandpipers.
The absence of rats on the little islands has allowed small birds, sandpipers, terns, and coots to reproduce freely there. On the main strip of land, the boobies with their sharp beaks are the only birds able to defend themselves from the rats and crabs. The problem of eradicating the rats has still not been solved. It's a real dilemma. If the rat is eradicated, then the crab population will explode again. That will endanger the vegetation growing around the coconut palms and banks of the lagoon. This vegetation is already sparse, though it is healthier now than it was in the past, when the island had a population of 10 million crabs. If the numbers of rats increase, then the number of crabs will of course diminish, and the vegetation will have a chance to recover. The crabs particularly like the thin, stringy kind of algae which grows in the lagoon, and submerge themselves briefly in order to grab a few young shoots. The carcinologists have noted that the crabs generally don't venture beyond a radius of 30 meters, perhaps because they are afraid they will not be able to find their way back to their tunnels. So they form distinct populations: the lagoon crabs, the coconut palm crabs, and the coastal crabs. Given the relative lack of vegetation, the crabs of Clipperton have adapted. Though they are generally vegetarian, they have now become omnivorous. In order to survive in such a limited space, the Planatus has broadened its diet to include the bodies of dead moray eels and birds, any food the birds regurgitate, and even their eggs. Under its attractive orange shell, this good-natured herbivore has become an opportunistic scavenger, yet its favorite dish remains the coconut palm, which it shreds with great dexterity. Logistical expert Gérard Guérin and scientist Alain Coutet are making a precise inventory of Clipperton's plants. They have come up with a device for measuring palm trees.
It's Jared's idea, and it's brilliant. It's a special coconut corkscrew. We won't disturb the artist at work. He's going to measure the trunk. What I am doing is gathering as much information as possible about the tree for my colleagues, so that they can later analyze the photos we will bring them. We have to allow for a margin of error. Is it stuck? Nearly there. Be careful.
This coconut tree is 14 meters tall.
That's it to within 2 meters.
In the kitchen, Pascal Salon has his work cut out for him, fighting off creatures who can't wait to loot the camp's provisions.
Here we have the two main predators, the ones who damage all our basic foodstuffs, namely the Clipperton crab and the Clipperton rat. Today we've got them both together, but every time I have the two together, one of them dies. Though it's not always the same one. The last time it was the rat, today it's the crab. Time will tell.
This egg, which the crab is so jealously guarding, doesn't come from the kitchen, but from the nest of a masked booby. This is a very rare meal because the boobies generally keep them at a distance with mighty thumps of their beaks. But the crabs make their moves whenever the male or female skips their turn in guarding the nest, leaving it unattended. While the grasses were brought to Clipperton by the wind and currents, these coconut palms were planted by man at the beginning of the 20th century. Apparently, the crabs decided to spare them. The recent decline in the number of Planatus has allowed the vegetation of the island to revive a little. Alain Coutet continues taking inventory. The Ipomea is part of the bindweed family. Its elaborate root system and large leaves help to trap moisture and hence benefit the crabs. This carpet of vegetation is living on borrowed time. If the rat is eradicated and the numbers of crabs increase, they will necessarily end up eating these plants too, whether they are beneficial or not. Much of the vegetation is exposed to quite difficult conditions. The salty sea spray lashes the coast regularly, searing all the young shoots. On top of that, there are the cyclones which strike every year and overwhelm the poor struggling plants completely. Alain Coutet tracks down the minutest species of plant on Clipperton and even finds certain microscopic algae growing in the damp, dark corners of the rock. On the other side of the rocky peak, Jean-Marie Bouchard is pursuing his study of Planatus. Some crabs live up in the rocks, hidden in cracks, feeding off bird droppings, dead roaches, lizards, of geckos. Most, however, remain on the ground, not too far from the lagoon, since they need to dip their gills in the water regularly. They also need mineral salts to harden their shells. Here the ground is harder for the crabs to dig. Food is also much scarcer, so the crabs fight more over anything that's worth having. Here, as in other relatively barren parts of the island, battles are particularly fierce. This fighting is not just a show of intimidation. The crabs can inflict serious damage on each other.
This animal has lost 2 legs. The 2 hind legs on the left side, and you can see very easily the buds of legs that are in the process of regenerating. These are animals that are quite capable of voluntarily shedding a limb, which can be broken off at the joint in order to escape a predator. That's to say, they leave a limb to the predator, who is generally content with that, and in this way the animal is able to escape. It's as if you could lose an arm and then regrow it.
This orange suit of armor does not protect against everything. The Planatus sports a pincer for close fighting. He is actually able to amputate his own limb and then regrow it. The crabs do not always manage to get rid of a defective pincer and may drag it around for days. But when they do finally succeed, the break is clean, without any shredding of flesh. It's as if the crabs were just put together from a kit of spare parts. The nerves in the abandoned pincer give a last brief illusion of life. Joseph Poupin, another crab specialist, helps Jean-Marie Bouchard figure out the hidden twists and turns of the underground city of the Planatus. In order to work out the shape of the tunnels, one is to be filled with epoxy resin. The tunnels can be more or less deep, depending on how gritty the terrain is. The area chosen for examination is one of the softest, making it a good place for building complex networks.
Look, they're coming out there. It's come out the other side.
Jean-Marie Bouchard prepares 15 crabs, which will be displayed for the general public. This requires a particular kind of expertise, which few people now have. Nowadays, the collections are destined to be used by researchers, and the focus is on DNA. So specimens are generally just preserved in jars of alcohol. Roger Swainston is the expedition's naturalist painter. He accompanies the scientists in order to sketch the wildlife of the island. He takes advantage of the crabs Jean-Marie has prepared, much easier than trying to paint creatures which are always scuttling about. In order to make an extremely precise drawing and faithfully reproduce the species' characteristics, Roger examines many specimens of Planatus. Representatives of all the island's crab species are pinned out for display. "24 hours after having poured the resin, Joseph Poupin removes the molded imprint of the crab's tunnel.
What we see essentially is that the layer is rather shallow. The width of the tunnel is nonetheless fairly great, but it's not high. There's a network spreading out from the main entrance. So a number of different tunnels can be reached from the entrance to the lair.
This part of the island is a mixture of sand, powdered coral, and guano. It's as full of holes as a Swiss cheese. Joseph Poupin and Jean-Marie have counted 113 openings in 100 square meters. The physiognomy of the Planatus of Clipperton has now been recorded for posterity, but the crabs remain endangered. In the end, it's been decided to call off the extermination of the rats. They are breeding. The thousands of traps set out were not enough. Eradication is going to require another operation on a much larger scale. Jean-Louis Etienne wants to set up a permanent scientific base on Clipperton. This atoll is the perfect place to examine how an ecosystem which has been disturbed by man can once again find its own natural equilibrium. Clipperton could become a perfect example of how to protect the natural environment, an example which could be followed across the world.